Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Actually, I gotta let people actually join the class.
We've only got 2 who clicked that quickly. So
I forget it doesn't automatically pull them in.
no, it
You have
doesn't.
to, you have to say okay.
And I think you have to actually be looking at it too. I don't think it notifies you with like a noise that it's open now,
Oh, that's special.
Yeah. Hi, Ruth.
For the for those of you who are joining, thanks for being here with us today. We are gonna wait about 5 to 6 minutes and just kind of hang out, let people join in properly and come into the room. Um, we in the meantime are probably just gonna give random updates and talk about it. And we'll be back with you in just a quick second. All right. Had a few more people join the room, just so you guys know we're hanging out for about 5 minutes and letting more people join the class. Once we get about, probably to, I'd say 10:06, 10:07, then we'll jump into the class and get started.
We had quite a full class today, registered completely full. So everyone wants to hear from JP.
He's very excited.
It's his debut.
Lindsay, do you want to go ahead and launch our poll?
Yes.
So everyone, while we're waiting for more people to join and get in and make sure they understand how to use this program we're on, you guys can click over to our poll, and that's just a very, very silly, basic question of, how familiar are you with foreclosures? Have you ever been a part of one? Have you been a part of a couple? Do you feel like you know everything there is to know about them? We just do this for us so that we can have a better idea of what kind of audience we have and make sure this is a topic that's actually useful to you. As always, we encourage questions throughout our class today. You can always use the chat feature for that. If you feel like today's topic needed to go in a different direction, I welcome critique. This is a roundtable discussion, and I really do value everyone's feedback on what we're talking about. So if you feel like today's class is boring and you want to talk about something different, ask me whatever you want. Again, it's a roundtable discussion. Um, and I think just 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we will get going.
I'll start with my whole spiel to get that out of the way, if that's all
Yeah,
right.
go ahead. Yeah, jump in.
Okay, so I'm sure the majority of people in this class have probably been to at least one of our previous classes. But if you haven't, I'm Lindsay. I'm the agent liaison for Geoffrey at Middleton. And if you signed up for today's class, then I have added you to our email newsletter, which comes out every month. Part of that newsletter is some good information on the area and what's going on, since we have so much new stuff happening all the time. And that's for you to pass on to your clients. But the thing that you will like the most is that the newsletter is our first invite to all of our upcoming classes. And so we do one of these classes the first Tuesday of every month. And so make sure that you read those emails so that you can sign up, because we do have limited space available in each of them. For today's class, if you are on a phone, We will be putting up some stuff that you can click. Like at the end of the class, there will be a registration link for our upcoming class. If you're on a phone, don't click that until you're ready to actually leave this webinar, because it will take you to a different screen and you won't be able to see or hear us. If you're on a computer, then you're totally fine to click at any point. It will just bring up a new tab. Like Geoffrey said, if you have questions, you can type them in the chat. I see people have found it, so that's good. You should be able to swipe through if you're on your phone to go over to the chat or the poll page. And you can type your questions at any point throughout the class, and we will get to them after the talk is finished. If you are interested in any of the classes that you have missed, you can find all of those on our website, which I can put a link up to at the end of class again. Again, there will be a follow-up email on this one too with a video replay in case you miss anything, have to run and grab some coffee or something. You can always catch it on the video replay. And then at the end of this class, I'll talk a little more about our next class in October, which is going to be pretty great.
Thank
Over to you.
Everybody, so we're going to go ahead and get started with everything. Today you see three of us on the screen because we have a guest today, JP. He is a closer in our office and a law student as well. He is going to take the bar in February, and we're very excited for him and a little nervous for him at the same time. So in preparation for him taking the bar and being an attorney, we've invited him to join in our class today so that he can give our opening to our topic. JP is going to open it and give a basic information spiel on what foreclosures are and how they work. And then I'm going to jump in after him and talk about some more specific information related to foreclosures in Alabama. Like I said before, feel free to use the chat. We are very excited to get your questions and hear back from you, and we will make sure we address all the questions. Lindsay will make sure we don't miss anybody. And so without further ado, I'm going to jump in and hand things off to Mr. JP. So JP, take it away.
Folks, thank you, Geoffrey. My good buddy here. I've known him for 10, 15 minutes now. So we're going to jump today into foreclosures and just hopefully try and solve some of the confusion that may lie around it, or some of the ambiguities that may be confusing some of y'all about how it works and what else can be known about it. So let's jump right in and get started. So obviously, whenever we have a closing, if there's a lender involved, we know that there's going to be a note and a mortgage. The note is basically what, it's where someone borrows money with the obligation to pay it back. And if they don't, and the foreclosure doesn't satisfy the debt owed, they can come after the individual. So the mortgage is what is a security instrument. We call it a security instrument because it secures the debt owed by the mortgagee, by the mortgagor, to some type of real property. So basically, if you don't pay the debt, it attaches your house or whatever is to attach to that loan that's supposed to be paid off. So in Alabama, we have three different types, overall, there are three different types of foreclosures. Alabama has judicial foreclosure, so you can go to the court if you need to foreclose on the property. But we also have non-judicial foreclosure. We're one of 29 states that has that. And basically, the reasoning behind that is Alabama has a goal of, the economic welfare of the state, where we can exchange real estate quickly. And if, someone isn't paying their mortgage, obviously you can foreclose on that, and it allows for the exchange of real estate to make our society and economy as a whole more profitable. So, but obviously, you can still go back and go to the court if you need to for a judicial foreclosure. So we're going to dive a little bit more into the power of sale and what it is and what you have to have in order for that to actually work. So the power of sale, it's defined by statute, and it's included in the mortgage instrument. And obviously, it's a non-judicial foreclosure, so it basically defines the terms of how that power is used, and it basically allows the mortgagee to regain possession of the property. So once that power is used, it can, in some instances, wipe out any interests that are junior or inferior to the mortgage, the foreclosed mortgage. So what defines, an interest as being junior or inferior, there's a lot of factors that go into that. including like the date it's recorded, if there's a security attached to that interest. But we're not going to go into the weeds on that today. But generally, something that we need to know is just that there's certain interests like federal taxes that aren't going to be wiped out, most likely by the foreclosure. It can differ from, there's some types of bankruptcies that can, wipe out all the interest and stuff like that, the majority of interest, but there's just a difference between the foreclosure and the bankruptcy, and there's not, forgive me, I was just looking at the slide there. Basically, the foreclosed mortgage for foreclosure, there's just some taxes and certain things like that that probably won't get wiped out by the foreclosure. So the other important thing is that power can be used by other mortgage companies that purchase that mortgage. So say if you get a mortgage with like Wells Fargo or something like that, and another mortgage company purchases that mortgage, if the power of sale is still in the mortgage instrument, they can still use that power of sale. Now, the power of sale is good for a period up to the maturity date, and then past that, up to 20 years. So during that, the loan term, they can obviously foreclose on the property if someone's not making their payments, and then after that 20-year period, generally the debt is considered forgiven if 20 years after the maturity date, nothing ever happens. But generally a mortgage is released, after it's satisfied. But if they're not paying, or anything like that, they can, when someone's trying to sell a property, the bank during that 20-year period after the mortgage is the maturity date, they could come back and during that sale basically ask for those payments to be made, and so that a proper release can be provided. If there's no maturity date listed in the mortgage instrument, then it's statutorily defined for a period of 20 years during that period where the foreclosure could take place. Now, Geoffrey's going to get a little bit more into the weeds here about how all of this works and how it's applicable to you guys. So without further ado.
Absolutely. Thank you, JP. I'm sure you're sweating, so you can go wipe off now, dry the brow a little bit. Just like JP was saying, in Alabama, we do allow for the power of sale foreclosure, or what they call the non-judicial foreclosure. It is the most common form of foreclosure, especially at my office and what we help with mainly residential foreclosures. Like JP said, there's only 29 states that allow for that power of sale foreclosure. By what we mean by power of sale, since Ruth asked, the power of sale refers to a clause in the mortgage that actually gives the mortgagee the power to foreclose. It gives them the power to sell the property in order to recoup the debt from the note. And so it's a very useful power to have, and it has to be put in the mortgage to be able to use it. Even though we have a statutory provision that allows for those things to take place, there's a requirement that the mortgage mention that power. And so it is a very standard one in our area. I see Paul already has a question on, is Tennessee a power of sale state? I am not sure about that one, Paul. I'm going to have to double check that. As an Alabama attorney, I can generally only talk about Alabama laws, but that seems like a quick Google I could find out for you. But moving right along, like JP said, once again, it's designed to be a much quicker process. Generally, your power of sale foreclosures are going to take 4 weeks, and usually they're shooting for 30 days because that's the limit for the homestead properties is 30 days. So usually, in fact, we'll just jump to the next slide here. This is your process for the non-judicial foreclosure or the power of sale foreclosure. And this will give us a good timeline concept. So the first thing that happens in a foreclosure is it's nothing fancy. There's no court notice. There's no official courier that takes over and says, you're being foreclosed on. All that's required by law is that we give public notice. That public notice is usually published in the newspaper, the local paper, or the local publication of some sort. If your local county where the property is located does not have a newspaper that publishes these kind of notifications, then you are allowed to publish in the neighboring county. Now that has to go for 3 weeks, 3 consecutive weeks. And then on the 4th week, you can go ahead and foreclose. Now, I mentioned earlier that the homesteaded properties are different. In Alabama, I think in 2016, we updated our laws so that the right of redemption period could be changed. Now, that basic rule we just talked about, where it's once a week for 3 weeks, that gives a standard right of redemption of 1 year. So after the foreclosure is over with, after 1 year, the buyer, or before 1 year is up, the person who was foreclosed on can actually come back and redeem that property again and say, hey, I want to actually pay my debt. I've got it figured out now, and I want to redeem it. The personal notice for a homestead property allows us to say, look, we're going to give the public notice as usual, but we're also going to mail a letter to the homeowner giving them notice that we are foreclosing. And that has to be 30 days before we actually foreclose on them. So generally, since you're only required to publish for that 3-week period, a week or two before you start the publication for public notice, you need to give that personal notice so that when you foreclose, you're within the 30-day period. By doing that, you lessen the right of redemption for that homeowner from 1 year, which is the standard right of redemption, to 6 months. So as a potential investor who is going to buy a foreclosure, it may be in your best interest to figure out whether that personal notice was given, because I know that does affect buyers sometimes who ask, well, is there a right of redemption? I'm a little worried about that. And if it's 6 months, that's much to deal with, especially if you're flipping the property. After you give our notices, the next thing you got to do is go to public auction. The public auction is what a foreclosure is. It is a sale by public auction. So what you're going to do is after we give public notice, we actually have to go to the courthouse. And on the steps, we usually send someone who hates doing this because it's fun to watch, but you have to go up to the courthouse steps and actually read out loud like you're a crazy person to people who don't care that you are foreclosing on a property and that the opening bid is what the mortgage is for, plus incidentals, bills, fees, and any kind of damage to the property. And so that is the opening bid that is being made. And then people have a chance at that point to actually respond to you, who is just talking to the random open air, and say, hey, I'd actually bid on that property. And I have the cash to do so today. And then they typically have to bring that cash either to you in that moment or to the office later in the afternoon, depending on how prepared they are for it. All foreclosures by statute have to be between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. We are not required to say when they're going to take place. All we have to do is say that it'll be on this date between the hours of 11 and 4. So typically, if you were going to be buying a foreclosure, you show up on the date at 11 or maybe even a little earlier just to make sure. And then you sit there for 5 hours and wait for someone to show up that you don't know what they look like and you don't know what they're going to be doing. And they just walk up the steps and you wait for them to start talking. So we'll go over that in just a minute about some tips and tips of the trade. So the next part of the foreclosure process is going to be the actual conveyance. So after the public auction takes place, typically you're going to have the mortgagees, the opening bidder and only bidder, and they'll go ahead and take it right back for the amount that's owed on the property. We'll do a foreclosure deed. A foreclosure deed is as good as any other deed. It is a legal conveyance by statute, by statutory power that allows you to take that title and have good title. It does link in the probate court from the original owner to the forecloser to the new person. So it does a good chain of title link. And then once that conveyance is made, then you have to consider, was that conveyance for all of what was owed? Typically, you don't get into this very much with big lenders because they just want to get in, get the majority of what they're owed, and then get out. And typically, they're not going to give a loan for more value than what the property is worth anyways. That's why they always do appraisals before you buy the property. But sometimes you get private lenders who are willing to go a little higher than that. And for whatever reason, they may have a deficiency balance, or where the note is for maybe $100,000 and they foreclose, but it's only worth $80,000. So you have that extra $20,000 that they're still owed that the property didn't take care of. And so they can actually come after the person they foreclosed on and put an additional judgment on them, a deficiency judgment. And then once that judgment is entered, they can actually go and garnish paychecks from that person. So in addition to taking their house, they're now garnishing their paychecks. And so that can get pretty ugly pretty fast. Something for people who buy foreclosures and want to invest with them is if someone is still in the home saying that they aren't going to leave for whatever reason, and they're possessing the property, you have to eject those people. You cannot do an eviction. An eviction is different from an ejectment, because an eviction is where you have a landlord and a tenant, and there is a legal relationship between the owner of the property and the person staying there. And you are removing that relationship and asking them to leave the property. After a foreclosure, that relationship has never existed and does not exist. And so you have a very different relationship. You have a possessor who could be a squatter at that point. They could be claiming that they still have ownership of the property, and you have to challenge their claim of ownership. And all of that has to take place in an ejectment proceeding, where you have to go to circuit court and you have to deal with them there. And that, could potentially lead to jury trials, could potentially lead to all sorts of fun things. My office does not do ejectments, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about them. The one thing I will say about that process is the only silver lining to someone staying in the property after you've told them to leave is that after 10 days of them ignoring your notice to leave, they lose their right of redemption, which again could be a potential good thing for people trying to resell the property quickly. So jumping on to our next slide here. Questions we get about foreclosures a lot are, okay, what if they redeem? How much money are they going to have to pay me back for? If I go ahead and buy a foreclosure and start doing work on it during the redemption period, what happens? The things you can charge for are going to be the interest, the taxes paid that you had to pay each year, insurance premiums that you had to pay to keep the house up, valid liens that you've found on the property that you've paid off on behalf of the previous owner to make sure it's clean. Because like JP said earlier, some liens will be removed by the foreclosure, but not all of them. There's quite a few liens that won't be removed by foreclosure. And we always advise you to do title searches on the property to figure out what those liens are and talk to attorney about, will this be wiped off or not, so that you actually know what you'll have to leverage to clean the property to get marketable title. And then the last thing is permanent improvements. So if you make improvements to property that were necessary that are going to be permanent fixtures to it, then you can charge that to the person when they go to redeem it. However, they can challenge you on that. They can challenge you and say, that's not the value that you think it is, or that wasn't an absolute necessary improvement to be made at the time when you made it. And so generally, if you're within the redemption period, paying all those other things, great. You're going to get redeemed back for those if the buyer comes back. Permanent improvements, it's riskier. They can generally challenge you and you'll have to fight and prove what you got. So if you make improvements, you keep every receipt. You keep every bit of proof you can have about what the value of those improvements are going to be. And then moving right into junior liens and how he said they weren't all created equal. What we say about mortgages is that they are the priority lien, and typically a lender will not give you a mortgage unless it can be the priority lien. And so sometimes you'll hear that, oh, there's another judgment out there, we need to subordinate it, which just means that we need to push it down in priority so that everyone acknowledges the mortgage is going to be the priority lien, the major lien. Some liens, whether they're not priority or are priority, doesn't matter. Government liens like taxes are always going to be on there. You'll have to deal with those one way or another. And there are other types of liens as well that may not be removed automatically. So we always recommend, once again, talk to an attorney if you think there are liens on the property. I see a question on Ruth about redeeming. Honestly, Ruth, redemptions are not that common. I was in a talk one time where I heard someone say that the redemption percentages, I think, were less than 1.5% in the state of Alabama of all redemptions. I have not found the data to back that up, but that is what I've heard in other talks. So the easy answer is no, they are not common. But it is still a risk. It is still a legal right that is out there. And so you should always act like it's a possibility. And then the last little bit of information that people ask about is, what about deed in lieu of foreclosures? What are those and how do they work? So typically what you have there is the mortgagee can ask for a deed in lieu of foreclosure. And then if the person being foreclosed on gives it, what they're really doing is waiving the redemption period and potentially saving the mortgagee the process of having to foreclose. But it's still possible for a mortgagee to foreclose even after getting a deed in lieu of foreclosure. So there may be some liens that you want wiped off, or there may be some issues that you want to clear up in probate. And so a foreclosure may be necessary to clean those things up. So even if you get a deed in lieu of foreclosure, what you're really doing there is saying, okay, good, they're not going to fight me on the foreclosure process, and I'm not going to have to deal with the redemption period. So sometimes it's beneficial to have both the deed in lieu and the foreclosure. But they can be used separately and they can be used in tandem. So that's a bit of how that works. Philip, I used to hear it as necessary improvements. This seems different from permanent. Can you comment on the difference? Necessary improvements is always what I've heard as well when we have discussions about this in a academic setting, but the statute is what actually says permanent. And I've not dug into the case law to see how they've stipulated between permanent and necessary. I think the reason people say necessary, if I'm just spitballing with you, is because it can be challenged. And if they challenge the improvement or the value of the improvement, then you want to be able to back it up as something that needed to be fixed and has a real value. Because if you do a cosmetic fix and you pay a lot of money for it, and then they come back and say, well, it's not really worth that much in the grand scheme of things. Like you paid X dollars, but on the resale, it didn't really help the value of the home very much. They can do that. And so typically you shouldn't make improvements that aren't permanent needed fixes or necessary improvements. If you want, Philip, I can dig into the case law there, but I don't know the difference between why people say necessary versus the statute say permanent. Mr. Hun asks, would the previous homeowner need all of the cash to use right of redemption? Yes, they have to redeem it for all that money, which is why right of redemptions aren't very common. I mean, you can always use a private investor to do a right of redemption. You can use another lender who's willing to back you. But typically when you go through a foreclosure process, lenders have rules about how long they have to wait before they can give you another mortgage. So I think for a conventional loan, it's something between 3 and 5 years before they'll even consider giving you another loan once you've been foreclosed on. So the answer there is yes, they have to present all the money because at that point you have a legal right when they quit making their payments to call the entire debt due. And so it's no longer about catching up with payments. It's about we've foreclosed, we're past that point. You have to redeem it for all of it, which is, again, one of the reasons why it's almost never done. I will say that during the foreclosure notice period, a lot of people will call the lender, whether it's a third private party or whether it's a lender, and negotiate with them on those types of deals where they'll say, look, I can't make the full payment, but I can enter into a payment plan, or I can enter into a partial payment where I pay half now and then a little bit later and try and catch up. And it's completely up to the lender at that point to cancel the foreclosure process and stop doing it, or say, no, we're not going to accept payment right now. We're just going to keep moving forward foreclosure. So we always encourage people being foreclosed on to be in communication with the lender even during the foreclosure process. All right, that leads us to tips. When you have an investor or someone who is interested in buying a foreclosure, I always recommend that you call the attorney who is doing the foreclosure. The attorney's office who's conducting the foreclosure is always listed on the public notice. So when you have an investor who's interested in something that they've seen come up on the foreclosure listings, then we recommend that you call them and say, can you verify the time that you plan to go out there and see if you can get a more specific time? Again, they're not going to be held to that because they've already announced it's between 11 and 4, but that may give you a better idea. And you may be able to ask, which steps does your guy go on? Our county courthouse has 4 sides to it, and there are steps on every side. And they're supposed to technically go in front of the doors of the courthouse, but our doors don't open to the steps. They open to that little retaining wall. So if you want to know exactly where they're going to be, you can ask. Typically, you can also ask about payment. Will you accept us to get certified funds and then bring them by the office before close of business? And then the most important question, is the foreclosure still on? Because again, at any point, if they decide to work with the person being foreclosed on, they could just not show up for foreclosure that day and just say that they've worked out a private deal. And so that's always something that I encourage people to don't be shy about calling the office. You may not be able to get the attorney, you may not be able to get them to call you back, but it's always worth trying. The other issue there, tip 2, is once again on that time. Plan to be there for all 5 hours because you never know. I've heard of people actually having their attorney sit with them so that when no one showed up and the foreclosure still happened, they would be able to at least challenge or call the other attorney's office to say, hey, no one ever did anything. Like, we need to talk to your guy who was doing the reading on the steps because he never read anything out loud. We never heard anything. We were there for all 5 hours. But then you got to pay for an attorney for 5 hours. So you got to balance that out. And once again, be ready with your funds. This is not going to be a, hey, I want to buy a foreclosure and, oh, I'm going to get a loan now. No, this is for certified funds. No one's going to wait for you to go get a bank loan to be able to buy a foreclosure. Always consider doing a title search on your properties that you're going to buy in foreclosure. Once again, you never know what you're getting. Foreclosures are as is, where is, and with whatever title mess is out there. So if you're being foreclosed on, it's likely that you have judgments going on in your life because you obviously don't have a great financial situation happening. And so we always recommend that you look, because once again, if there are tax liens out there, you will have to pay them in order to clean up title, and they do attach to your property. So it's worth it to look at how much you're going to be investing in the property, because it's not just the price of the foreclosure, it's the price of cleaning the property up so that you can sell it again. And so that's always something we encourage people to do. A title search is usually only about $150. So in the grand scheme of things, it's worth it. If you're not familiar with the ejectment process, you should become familiar with it before you buy a foreclosure. Because if you are buying a home, a lot of them are already abandoned because people, when they quit making their payments, they see the writing on the wall and they leave. But if you get someone who is going to be wanting to stay there longer, then you need to know how long that process is going to take, what the price of that process is going to take, because once again, we've added to the cost of your foreclosure and what the purchase is going to be. And so you should add all that into your thought process. Don't get underwater when you buy a foreclosure just because you're not aware of taxes and you're not aware of the ejectment costs and you're not aware of the time frames. Be aware of those things. Again, we've talked about the renovations during the redemption period. You guys know the risk. I'm not going to belabor that. And that leads right into point 7. Buyers, I've seen buyers get nervous when they buy a property that's coming out of foreclosure because they see the redemption period on there and they see that they're buying it during the redemption period. So you can always, that's one of the questions you can ask the attorney early on is, hey, was this a homesteaded property and did you guys give notice so that my redemption period is only going to be 6 months rather than a year? And see if you can get that information from them. So again, all of my slides today have been focused on your view as realtors and potential investors and buying foreclosures. If you have any other questions related to foreclosures from a different angle, maybe being foreclosed or anything like that, I'll be happy to answer them. If you have any other questions related to other topics, I'm also happy to focus on those. Just as a real side note, real quick, Alabama Realtors did something very cool recently. They've actually done it twice. The Alabama Realtor Association has gone to the Supreme Court, like I said, twice in the last, I think, month and a half over the CDC moratorium for evictions. And they have arguably won both times. The first time the Supreme Court said, we agree with you, but we're not going to enforce anything right now because the CDC is going to end their moratorium already. And then the CDC didn't end it. They extended it. So they went back to court. And the Supreme Court at that point said, okay, now we agree with you and we're going to help you enforce it. And so they instructed the district court order saying that the CDC did not have its authority to continue the moratorium, that it needed to end now, took place. And so that's very exciting. Whether you agree with it or not isn't really my point here. It's just very exciting that the Alabama Realtor Association was involved in a Supreme Court case that actually had an effect on the CDC's power. This will be something that is arguably taught in classes for years to come. The Supreme Court was very clear that it is possible for the government to do this. It just needs to come from Congress. And if Congress wants to give the CDC the power to do these things, they can do that. But it's not going to be something that they can take from previous statutes that already exist. So with all of that said, thank you guys very much for being here. As always, I appreciate this class very much. I like giving them. I like hearing your questions and engaging with you guys. If you have any other questions, I'm always happy to answer them. This class is an hour long. We always design it so that we talk for the first 30 minutes and the next 30 minutes are specifically geared towards questions. This is not a CE class. You are not getting credit for anything. This is strictly academic. So you are not forced to sit here for the next 30 minutes while people ask questions. If you want to hang out and see what questions people do ask, we always encourage that. And I see I do have a question. So Philip, did you discuss redemption bonds and when they are advised? Also, any language agents should put in the contract when purchasing a foreclosure. Philip, I did not go into that. Redemption bonds are a topic that I didn't prep for this particular class. It's a topic that I'd be happy to go into in the future, but at this point, I would probably not go into it today unless you had a more specific question about them. But even then, I'd probably advise you outside of the class. So if you would like me to jump into that about contracting for foreclosures or redemption bonds, I can always do a future class that dives more into depth on those things. So good question, just not today. Thank you. Once again, I want to thank JP for doing our introduction. We really like having JP around, and we're excited about his future. And we're excited about him taking the bar in February. He hates himself. He has no sleep in his life whatsoever. He's got a brand new baby who's not letting him sleep at all. And he's doing full-time work with us while doing law school on the weekends. So he really is a glutton for punishment. We appreciate him taking the time to prep for this class and get ready for it. If anyone wants slides or they want anything else about something we've done today, we are always happy to give out our information. Like Lindsay said earlier in the chat, these classes are recorded and they will automatically be uploaded. We typically try and take all of our classes and make them into a written blog after they're done. Lindsay is great about getting those up very quickly, and then I'm very bad about slowing her down and making it so that I have to read through them and edit them first. So if we ever have delays, you can blame me, not Lindsay. Lindsay's great. We can definitely give you those slides. Lindsay will be back with you on that one.
When you get the follow-up email, just reply to it and it'll come directly to me and just say that you'd like the slides. And then I'll be able to just send it over to you real quick.
All right. Anyone else have any questions for us? I know we try not to make these classes too in-depth. I plan them specifically to be a little generic because it's really introductions of topics to people. I really want you guys to know certain terms so that when you have clients and they ask you questions about things, you recognize the terms, or when they ask you about how should they go about a process, you can have some basic advice to give. As always, I always encourage you guys as realtors to not hold yourself out as legal authorities. Go ahead and say, here's what I've heard on that topic. I definitely know that we have to do X, Y, and Z to protect you and your interests, but we should definitely talk to an attorney, or we should talk to a professional, or we should talk to a surveyor. You know, one of the best things realtors do for their clients is they're a source of information for other people. Mr. Hun, do you see or hear investors going to Madison County Courthouse to buy foreclosures? Is there a percentage you would say it happens? I absolutely hear about people going to Madison County Courthouse and buying foreclosures. We were just a part of a foreclosure recently where I had probably 3 or 4 phone calls before the foreclosure took place about people being interested in it and wanting to know what was going to happen, when it was going to happen. And I even had someone that hired an attorney to keep up with me regarding that foreclosure because it was a prime piece of property that wasn't developed yet. It was just land. And what ended up happening, and I'm glad people were calling, because we ended up having the property completely redeemed by the person being foreclosed on. And so I called all those people back and said, hey, we're not going to the courthouse today. and so you don't need to show up. And so I know there are people going to the courthouse and they are making bids. I personally have not been part of bidding wars where every time I've gone to the courthouse and read a foreclosure out, no one responds to me. I get weird looks from people walking by thinking I'm a crazy person. But I have been a part of the process, obviously, from this side of it, of being at the office, having people call us with interest. So
We've got one from Ruth right before that as well.
oh, how is the asking price when listed with REO determined on FC? What do you mean by REO, Ruth? If you could clarify that for me. But the asking price for the mortgagee is usually pulled from different things. And I said it very quickly. Yes. So those fees that you undertake can be charged to the foreclosure. There is obviously a limit to the things you can add to the initial bid, but it's my understanding that you can calculate damages to the property. You can calculate fees that have been associated with the foreclosure process, and you can take any brokerage listings that have been done. Um, Generally, I would present every fee you have associated with it to your attorney so they can look over it. And then because this is a non-judicial foreclosure, in order for this to be challenged, the person being foreclosed on would have to say, I challenge the fees you've listed there for your initial bid. And like I said, there's only 1% of people that actually try and redeem property anyways. So I would argue that that's something that you and your attorney who's processing the foreclosure should talk about, the strategy of what to put on the initial bid, to make sure that if someone bids over you, you're fully compensated for what it took for you to get that foreclosure taken care of. I hope that answers your question, Ruth. If not, feel free to follow up. Sonja, can you tell us about your closing services? Most clients want to know how an attorney compares on price and services. I've never had an issue with an attorney, but sometimes clients aren't happy with response times. As always, communication is one of the hardest things to manage when you're dealing with attorneys in real estate. We try our best to stay in constant communication with people. That's one of the reasons Lindsay's job exists. Lindsay's a great communicator, and she will give you updates whenever you need them, and she will find the right person in the office to get you those updates. As far as our fees go, typically on a foreclosure, our fees start at I think 950 is where we start, and then you have to add in recording fees for a residential foreclosure. I'll have to double check our fee sheets, but I think that's where it is. And then obviously, if it's going to be an overly complicated foreclosure or you need help with processes that aren't built into our fees, we'll have that discussion with you. We will always do a consult for free. We don't charge for our consults. So if you need to just talk it out and figure out what that process entails for you and what that looks like as far as timelines, we're always happy to discuss that with you. The biggest thing with timelines on foreclosures is you don't have to list the bid price on the initial notification with the public. So I would always argue that you go ahead and make your notifications that you need to start your timelines early. So once we finally find out that we're going to be doing the foreclosure process, we'll immediately send out the personal notification if it's required. Then we'll immediately draft up the notification for the publication. I will say publication fees are going up. Our local one in Madison, I think, has gone up to like $900 to publish in the Huntsville Times, and that's for the 3 consecutive weeks. And so typically you need to build in that to your idea of, my fees maybe $950, but then you're gonna have to pay another $900 just in advertising, and then there's an additional fee for recording at probate later. So there's a lot of moving pieces to that, and we're always happy to discuss that with you. Ruth, we do conduct short sales, but I don't know our fees on those. So I will have to look into that if you ever want us to conduct short sales for you.
I would like to go back to Sonia's question real quick about the communication. So if you are closing with our office, I will email you at the start of every single week and just let you know where we are, what's outstanding on a contract, what we still need from you or your client, or even from the other side, just so you have a pretty comprehensive view of what stage we're at. And then I'm also on call all the time. So if you ever wanted to email me or call me or text me, I don't ever stop working. So I will answer you all the time.
Yeah, Lindsay is definitely a workaholic. We've tried to make her stop, but she just loves it too much.
It's true.
So we're grateful to have her.
I'm also, I've had my toddler at home for 1.5 years. So when I'm working, I have a break. As weird as that sounds.
There you go.
Work is my time off, really. Can we talk about this like public listing for foreclosures more? Because this sounds wild to me. And this is the first time I've heard this. So, I mean, I don't even really know what my question would be about it, but like to publish it in the newspaper to notify someone that they're being foreclosed on, like what?
So, I mean, typically it's a build up to it. So typically you've told the person over and over again that they're late on their payments, they need to collect the judgment. You're giving lots of collection letters over and over again. You're giving them notices that, hey, we're going to foreclose if you don't do this. So typically that's not where the communications with the client have started. This is just the foreclosure process and a very, very box of what's required for the actual foreclosure from a legal standpoint. So typically that it is a little crazy that the only legal requirement is a newspaper published notice. But I guess that's also why they have the right of redemption in there for the year, so that if you're caught off guard by it, you can address that. If realtors want to get CE certified, SFR is short sale and foreclosure resource. I think Ruth is just giving information there, so I'm going to let that just be out there, which is great information to be certified and let your clients know that you are certified in a specific topic. Mr. Hun, is the lender able to bid against you, say if you are the only one at the courthouse steps? So the lender actually is the opening bid. So typically they're the ones that start the bidding, and then their initial bid is going to be what they're owed. And then typically the lender doesn't want to make any other bids because they're not trying to spend money on the property, they're trying to get their money back. And so they're not interested in trying to make a profit, they just want to save their investment. Now if you have a private investor, they could have a different approach, but typically your big lenders, all they want is to recoup damages. And then if someone bids over them, great. That means they're getting paid. So they could care less, and it'll save them the headache of having to resell the property on the next side of things. Again, it really comes down to the investor or the lender or the third party that's doing it. But that's typically been my experience with third party lenders, is that they're not wanting to own the property. That's why they sold it and did a note and mortgage on it. They're just wanting to have the investment of the interest. Because I mean, you have to imagine at foreclosure, they're collecting interest during the entire time of the note. And so that's usually the reason they got into the game in the first place. Now we are in a unique market. We're in a market where properties have appraised very quickly and for a lot more than they initially were a couple of years ago. So that may be changing strategies for some lenders in our area. But again, that's a lender to lender issue. But to answer your very basic question, yes, they can bid against you. They are the opening bid.
While we still have a few people here, I'm going to put up the link to register for our next class. Our next class is on October 5th, and it is Investment Property 101 with Luke Hayes. So if any of you have been part of any of the 1031 CE classes that we did last year, Luke was the instructor in those classes. So this one is not CE. This is a 1 hour long class, just like these ones. They're for education purposes only. Kind of like just a really quick brush up on 1031 and investment property tips. So if you took the CE class last year, then this is just kind of a refresher for you. But we are working with Luke on getting an actual CE class worth 3 credits scheduled for late October. So stay tuned for that announcement as well, which will be in an upcoming newsletter.
Yeah, and to mimic Susan, Luke is brilliant. Luke is great. He is my top choice for 1031s. They do the flat rate fees, and he really gives you all the attention you need. He's very knowledgeable. This is all he does is 1031s. So he's an endless resource of all the questions you could ever want to ask relating to investments. And can I do a partial 1031? Can I do a full 1031? Can I do a reverse 1031? He's got answers to all those things. And we really like working with him. So if you can, go ahead and come to that class, just if for nothing else, to hear Luke's really quick 1 hour refresher. And then obviously, if you can't make that class, make sure you do make the 3 hour CE. Me and Lindsay have sat through that class probably 5 or 6 times at this point, and every time we hear him talk, every time I hear him, I think I pick up one more new thing because there's so much information he gives. It's just like drinking water from a fire hose, but it's a very good class.
He's also a really great speaker too. So it's a really complicated topic that's like, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into a 1031. It's a lot of information, but he makes it very easy to digest.
Yes, I would agree. JP, do you have any thoughts you want to throw out there? Any excitements you have coming up?
Stay with you guys.
Tell us the latest thing your baby has learned.
Let's see. She smiles a lot now. She laughs. So no one told me that they're essentially like a potato for the first 2 months. I mean, they're just kind of staring blankly off into space like 80-year-olds. Anyway, but now she's super interactive. She loves to be outside. So it's an interesting experience. That and the blank stare, they look right into your eyes deep, and you're like, this is a touching moment. And then they toot. That's where you're now. Bond is established.
That's why they're smiling. She's
excited. Wasn't me.
Relief.
No, it was just gas. But she's great. She's great.
All right, everybody. We're going to give this another 5 minutes or so. There's only a couple people left in the class at this point. As always, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have, or at least address the questions and tell you I'll address it later. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them up there. If not, as always, thank you so much for coming out today. We really do appreciate being able to engage with you guys in this way and just kind of spread some general knowledge. Susan, absolutely. We're always happy to chat. Just reach out to Lindsay, schedule an appointment if you need one. And then we'll be happy to sit down and answer all the questions.
I'm also going to throw up the link to our class page. So that will show you what's upcoming. It also has all of the links to our past classes in case you missed any and want to check those out. We got a lot of good stuff there. And we need to, I guess, start working on what our class list is going to be for 2022 because we're getting close.
Yeah, so my initial plan right now for those of you who like these classes is to do kind of a repeat of classes that I think people really appreciated first. Things like our contract class, just a basic reminder of what's in our contracts that people just generally take for granted after a little while. And maybe some other classes like our eviction class, I think was a very well-received class. So if you have specific topics that you would like to hear about regarding anything that has to do with law and real estate, we'll be happy to research that topic and do a quick presentation on it. I'm excited about next year because we're going to make JP do a lot of classes. He's really excited about it. He just found out, so it'll be fun.
Real-time reaction here.
That's right.
I've written down the redemption bonds one because we had a lot of interest in that today. So hopefully we can do one on that early in the year.
Yep. And that's a part of the process where, when you're going through the actual foreclosure process versus buying a property that was in foreclosure and may still be in redemption, there's a lot of nuances to this topic. And so what we've focused on today is the very basics, residential foreclosures that have to do with sometimes investment, sometimes homestead, and what's the timeline for that? What's the process for it? And so today was a great introduction to foreclosures, but there's a whole endless mound of information we could dive into regarding foreclosures across the board. So I don't think I have anything left to say. I think I've said everything I can possibly say on this topic. Lindsay, you have any last minute things you want to add?
I think I've thrown all mine out there. Just get at me if you have a topic you would like us to talk about.
All right, guys. Well, thank you again for being here today. Thanks to JP for giving his guest spot. And always thanks to Lindsay for her organization of all these events and her communication with all the agents. If you guys ever need anything, start with Lindsay. She'll get you where you need to go. So you guys have a great one. Hope everyone had a great Labor Day weekend, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.